Prohibition is synonymous with speakeasies, jazz, flappers, and of course, failure. I'm Ed Helms, and on season 3 of my podcast, Snafu, there's a story I couldn't wait to tell you. It's about an unlikely duo in the 1920s who tried to warn the public that prohibition was going to backfire so badly it just might leave thousands dead from poison. Listen and subscribe to Snafu on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
I want to start with like a really basic, I think, simple question. And we always do this with every episode. Grant wrote the wrong question in. So Grant at the top of our outline said, I should ask you, why will China's internet crush American democracy? And I want to change that to when. When will it crush American democracy, do you think?
It's already happened.
Okay, cool. Okay.
It's already happened. It's already in the past. There's no rescue. Yeah, I mean, this idea that just by having a foreign app in your country, your democracy or your political system be crushed, that's exactly what China has done. So congratulations, it already happened.
This is so exciting. I feel much safer in the hands of the Chinese government actually than the American government right now. So I'm glad that they've successfully taken over the country via dancing trends. I'm Ryan Broderick. With me, as always, is our producer, Grant Irving, who you will hear pop in throughout the show. This is Panic World, a podcast about how the internet warps our minds, our culture, and our reality. So I don't know if you guys are aware, but along with being in an AI arms race with China, we are also now in a tariff war with China, and they have recently said that they will fight it to the death, which you can interpret however you want. The basis of the China Cold War that we're currently in is the idea that Americans should be panicking over China's, increasing control of the economy, of technology, of culture. And all of that assumes that the Chinese are radically different from us, that they have some sort of grand master plan that the government is engaging in, and that, our way of life is better than what theirs is, and we're fighting to defend it. All of this sort of like jingoistic feelings that comes with a Cold War. But to help make sense of this panic that's helping destroy our economy and really turning the volume up on our AI arms race and, freaking everybody out about TikTok is, I think, some pretty serious misunderstandings of what life is actually like on Chinese internet. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And joining me is Tech and Democracy Fellow at New America, editor at Reboot, and the writer of one of my favorite newsletters, maybe of all time, Chaoyang Trap House, Tianyu Fang. How are you?
Good. So great to be here. I've been a big fan of Garbage Day and so glad to be talking to you guys.
I don't want to say this to sound arrogant. The worlds that I live in online are very niche and bizarre, and I get so excited when someone is covering those worlds or even more niche and more bizarre worlds than mine better than me. And when I saw your guys' stuff years ago, I was like, fuck, this is so good. And I could never do this. It's so great. To kick things off, at the very top level, how would you say the way culturally the Chinese internet works differs from the American internet?
Well, I think broadly it's very similar, right? I think you do have the obvious stuff going on, right? There's more state directives. There's more censorship. The platforms themselves have less power in recent years because of government restrictions. More broadly, I think it's very similar, right? They're very similar platform incentives or very similar incentives for users. And you have a lot of niche subcultures that are interesting and fun. So yeah, I would say, people tend to portray the Chinese internet as something that's completely different.
The fact that the Chinese internet and the American internet do have a lot of cultural similarities. And obviously, like, there are differences, and we're going to get into them. But one of the pieces Chaoyang Trap House made, like, very early on, I remember gasping when I saw it, I think, where you guys did a whole thing about the Joe Rogans of China.
Yeah. That's our friend Tai Wei Chen.
Yeah.
Who wrote 3 characters on the Chinese internet. One of them was this Tinder coach. That was a weird world of Chinese masculinity bros.
And I feel like it's actually kind of a good place to start with this, because so much of the way the American government right now, the sort of the Trump administration, is talking, especially the China hawks in the Trump administration. So much of the way the U.S. government is talking about the Chinese internet is, the idea that they can use technology to brainwash Americans. And obviously, we can all agree that we have been brainwashed by the Chinese government. That it's totally fine, and I like it, and it's great. Do you worry personally about sort of the rise of global Chinese tech platforms? Is that a concern for you?
No, just in part because I don't think these platforms are actively censoring speech on other platforms, right? Like, clearly there are things I can post on TikTok here in the ways that, but I wouldn't be able to post them on like Douyin in China.
Right.
But I just don't see sufficient evidence to say that this entire censorship apparatus that is focused on domestic political stability in China, right?
Right.
It's going to be expanded to America in a way that, like, I wouldn't be able to talk about like the private lives of Chinese politicians. I just do not think that is part of what's happening right now. I mean, it could happen, but I'll believe it when I see it.
You're actually hitting on something really funny, and it's like a really funny contradiction that I don't think got talked enough about during the brief TikTok ban stuff, which was like, if China has a very specific domestic policy that it's enforcing censorship to defend, why would it also be like upholding American Christian values in America? Why would it bans like the word sex, right, from its algorithm, like the rise of like self-censorious algo speak?
Yeah.
Like, why would it be upholding a Christian right like censorship program here?
I mean, if there's anything like censorious, if you will, it's precisely that. I think if TikTok and Douyin at least came from this similar sort of algorithmic system, then I think the intention or one of the byproducts of Chinese censorship is that they want to tone down all these sort of political debates, right?
Right.
That, like, Douyin's intention is not to stop particular types of political debate, but they're just very worried about political debates in general, whether they're pro-state or anti-state, right? So I think when people are talking about how like TikTok is, you couldn't talk about sex and that's more sort of sensitive, it's precisely that. From the platform's perspective, they don't want to get into quote unquote political trouble, whether it is questioning the systems of the Communist Party of China or it is like Israel-Palestine in the US.
Right. It doesn't want scrutiny from either country. Like, It doesn't want scrutiny in the US or scrutiny at home.
Right. I mean, I don't know if that's what TikTok is actively doing, but
sure. But I mean, in terms of like comparing the darker corners of the web, what kind of similarities have you seen? Like, yes, there are Joe Rogan-esque figures. I mean, and I know for a fact that you guys, that China has the 50 Cent Party, which is like kind of a term that I think is an older term for like nationalist trolls. But like, how similar are the weirder corners? Like, what do they have there that we would have here? There's
always this perception that every single person in China is either resisting the state or they're being complicit with the government. That is just a total that's clearly not true, right? So what you see more often is much more complexity and nuance. During COVID, there were people who were trying to protest COVID restrictions.
Right. I was actually going to bring this up. Yeah,
and there were people who were saying like ha, which means like great, right? It's just like all positive comments on social media platforms. But if you read it, you will know that they're criticizing this idea that you could only be cheerleaders for the government when it comes to discussing these policies.
I remember there was like a really magical month. I mean, not magical in the sense of like what COVID was doing to China, but there was a magical sort of moment between like December and January where I had a translator working with me and we had WeChat running. And it was, I've sort of been, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that like the Chinese government, in terms of like in times of crisis, will sometimes allow like a pressure valve release point of just like, okay, everyone can kind of like complain and bitch because like it's better than not letting that happen. And so there was this moment right before COVID really spread beyond China where the average person on public WeChat feeds were just like complaining the way that you would see people complain on Twitter here. And I remember just thinking like, I wish Americans knew, not even just for China, but for like the whole world, that like the internet is sort of the same everywhere you go. It was like kind of a nice moment of human connection in this weird way. But then it seemed like it disappeared really fast. Like
I don't know.
With the white sign protests.
Yeah, I don't know what the intentions of the government were, in many ways allowing these criticism to come out. But throughout the history of the Chinese internet, whether there was or was not a severe or intense censorship, there's always been people who are trying to dance around this censorship apparatus.
Right. Got to be a little more sly, a little more clever with it, I think.
Yeah, and government does they could detain someone, or they could knock on somebody's door and be like, hey, you've been criticizing Xi Jinping, you shouldn't do that again. But most of the time, it's just people trying to say things in a different way, right? That they're trying to go around these restrictions.
So what you said kind of rings true for me. I was in Beijing in December 2019, and I went out for lunch with someone who was kind of working at like a digital media outlet kind of place in China. And, the conversation eventually, it wasn't like we were having a totally open and honest conversation about how censorship works in each country, but like we kind of got to a point. And she said something that has really stuck with me ever since, where she was like, look, we have over 1 billion people here all using the same internet. And like, if you want to hear the argument, the censorship argument from the Chinese perspective, it is, if we had your internet, we would have riots every day because we have so many people who are coming online for the first time right now. And I'm not saying that like I agree with this, and I'm not saying that even she agreed with it, but it was like, that is the argument that is made here, is that like we need guardrails because if we don't, everyone will start killing each other. Which then she was like, look at your country. And I was like, okay, all right. Thank you. I get the thought process, which I think is one that is also not communicated to Americans very often. That like, and I've heard this argument also in Europe. I've heard this argument in South America. Like other countries that don't have freedom of speech, they're much more comfortable with maybe we don't just say everything we think and feel on the internet all the time. So I can understand it, even if I don't maybe necessarily agree with it as an American.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with it either. But I think we have to go back to the premise that is, I think this kind of free speech that we talk about in America is a very specifically American thing.
Yes.
That it is not widely accepted by a lot of Europeans, to the same extent that we do here in the US. Not at all. And certainly not in Asian countries. I think it is a good thing in many ways.
As do I. I also don't think Americans think of it as political. Like, I don't think that Americans think about unlimited free speech access, at least in theory, on an American platform in a country that doesn't have free speech as a political act. Like allowing Twitter to go live in the Middle East leading to the Arab Spring. Like we don't as Americans think that we had a role in the politics of that, when obviously free speech is a political decision.
I mean, but the U.S. did, right? This is part of the foreign policy agenda of the Obama administration in the Clinton State Department, right? She was out there in early 2010 talking about at the museum in Washington, D.C., I think, which is now closed. It is. And she was talking about how, the U.S. must defend the freedom to connect, as Secretary Clinton called it back then. Internet freedom was part of U.S. foreign policy.
Wait, hold on. I forget. What happened with like internet free speech and Hillary Clinton later? Did that go bad? She may have bet on the wrong horse on that one. I'm not really sure.
I think that one didn't work out too well, right? I think
what happened when they got her emails? This is a thing that I think Americans do not consider political. They see it as like a universal true good, and I was raised here, I think that too, but it is political. And when
Secretary Clinton was making that speech, right, when she was talking about how the internet should help with democracy and revolutions abroad, countries like China and Russia will respond and be like, wait. This is a dangerous thing that American platforms can now, topple our government. Like, whether I agree with those governments or not, right? I think that was a valid concern from their perspective. And then the U.S. comes back and be like, these people are paranoid. What are they worried about?
Right.
It's like they are worried exactly about what you said you would do to them. Right. So there's this weird.
These guys are like getting really hostile with us because we keep publicly talking about using our technology to overthrow other governments. I don't know why they're really hostile now. That's so strange.
I don't know either.
I'm coming around to the idea that maybe we aren't so innocent in this Cold War after all. But let's get into the China side of it. Right after a word from our sponsor, which is Donghu Jinlong Industrial Grade Glycine, we're going to be talking about how China's internet was born. Have you ever heard of Insert Coin Clothing? They're all about trying to help people take their love of video games from the screen into the real world. It used to be that people dressed up in a way to let you know what they liked, what they cared about, and then people kind of forgot to do that. So it's great that Insert Coin Clothing is trying to help, people show off their nerdy love of different video games. And they've got shirts for all kinds of different video games. Ace Attorney, Astrobot, the Kojima games. I'm a big Metal Gear Solid 5 guy, so that's pretty good. Mass Effect, Overwatch. You name it, they got it. And best of all, everything is official and made in partnership with the studios for those games, which is awesome. Because, there's so much junk on Instagram, but Insert Coin Clothing, they're doing it the right way. Their product sizes come all the way from extra small to 3XL. Perfect for that drapey Gen Z e-boy look. You could put like a little chain around your neck. TikTok loves that. Insert Coin Clothing ships worldwide, one flat cost for standard shipping, and it's always fully tracked, which is great. And they have a sweet little respawn function, and they will email you when they restock products in your size. You can find all that at insertcoinclothing.com, and their main social accounts are Insert Coin Tees on X/Twitter and Insert Coin Clothing on all Meta platforms. Okay, let's figure out how things got so tense. I want to run through a rough timeline of how China came online and how their internet looks and feels different from ours. I want to sort of talk about the beginning buildings of the modern Chinese internet. So it seems like 1996 was the place to start here. Robin Lee, working for an American tech company, creates a search engine algorithm. It's called RankDex, and it becomes China's biggest internet search provider in the late 90s. Sergey Brin and Larry Page cite RankDex in their patent applications for the website that would become Google, which I think is kind of an adorable moment of that's your sliding door moment. Is we had a very similar internet for a while. Then in 1999, which I eventually want to maybe even write a book about this idea, the year that the internet kind of was created around the world as we understand it, Tencent starts a messaging service called OpenICQ, which becomes QQ. I don't know how old you are, but did you ever use
Yeah? That was my first instant messenger.
Okay, I have a question. Did you ever use MSN or AIM?
I didn't use AIM, but I used MSN.
Okay, close enough.
Yeah.
What does how does QQ do anything cool that MSN Messenger didn't do?
Yes. I mean, this is 2006, 2007 QQ as opposed to the original early 2001 QQ. But you could have this thing called QQ Show, which is a digital character that you can
an avatar.
It's an avatar. It's like a digital avatar. And you could change clothes. It's every time you talk to someone, you can see their avatar. And they could see mine. That's part of it. They had their own music streaming thing. They had video games.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I think in many ways that was also a super app, even though it was before the app form.
That's fascinating. In 1999 is also when Alibaba, the sort of Amazon-esque e-commerce platform of China, launches. 2000 is when we get RankDex becoming its own search engine, Baidu. This is when web portals in China start to centralize. In the 2000s, American search engines aren't blocked in China, but Baidu is more successful because it's more reliable, which I think is an interesting thing that Google clearly is influenced by RankDex, which becomes Baidu, and it still isn't as good, which I think goes against the other American narrative, which is that our products are open and thus better. Which is interesting.
Yeah. Baidu was just better because it's it was optimized for Chinese language, right?
Right. What I think is really fascinating about the early 2000s Chinese internet is that they are already experimenting with stuff that we have not even really nailed down now. So like Alibaba launches its own payment service in 2004. Alipay is 20 years old. Like we don't even have that now. Like that's actually crazy to think about.
Yeah, I remember back then you would also buy things and then pay your courier, your delivery guy in cash. Not the delivery fee, but the charge for the actual product.
So what are you paying with Alipay?
So I think Alipay has had several different features, right? Like
I see.
One of the
Okay.
features was like clearly like bank transfer, right? Like you connect it to your bank account.
Sure.
And the truth was like a lot of people didn't have bank accounts at this time. I know quite a lot of people. They opened bank accounts so that they could use Alipay and WeChat Pay.
Cool. Okay.
If you think about it, the majority of the country back then was still very rural. And people weren't using bank accounts to transfer things, or bank transfer was more like wire transfer, like Western Union style.
Interesting. There's a similar thing happening right now in Latin America. There's a Mexican equivalent to 7-Eleven called OXXO. And by the way, Panic World believes in OXXO supremacy. If OXXO ever wants to sponsor the show, they're a great convenience store chain. Love them to death. But they've like started becoming like an e-commerce platform, and now like they will basically, if you can open a bank account, you can use OXXO Pay, and the same idea is happening. So like it makes sense. I think maybe in America, like we got stalled out with our fintech in a way that a lot of other countries didn't, and now we have Bitcoin. So like that, like basically the crypto industry wouldn't have to exist if we hadn't stalled out.
Yeah.
So in that respect, obviously China is in a better place than we are. But what about the hot topic of censorship? Because like that is real. We sort of have to reckon with the fact that like their internet is heavily censored and surveilled. By the end of the 2000s, we're now getting like proper social media over here. You know, we have Twitter now, we have Facebook, we have YouTube. That's all coming in. And in 2009 in China is like one of the early examples of like anti-censorship protest. You were actually mentioned this at the top, like having to get around by being a little clever. Are you familiar with the grass mud horse meme?
Yeah, that was one of the earliest memes.
Can you talk us through it? How did this work?
It's just like one of the earliest anti-censorship memes in China. The pronunciation is the same for like 草泥马, which is like fuck your mother.
Cool.
Right?
Hell yeah.
And then grass mud horse is like different characters, but it sounds similar. It's 草泥马 versus 草泥马, right? It's like slightly different tones. So the earlier censorship, a lot of the censorship restrictions were actually imposed by platforms, and their idea was to foster what they called a harmonious, like internet community, right? It's like, sorry, no cursing on the internet. And it was less political, right? It was more about, sorry, just no cursing. And people were coming up with all sorts of ways to make fun of it, right? 草泥马 was one of them. Grass mud horse was one of them. And like the word for harmonious, right? Harmony is 和谐, and they called it 和谐, which is river crab. So they would start saying like, oh yeah, I had a great idea yesterday that I wanted to post, but I got river crabbed by the minister.
Oh, that rules! That's so good.
Yeah. So you start seeing sort of censorship, but also discussions of censorship in a rather explicit way.
Like they're avoiding censorship to have a meta conversation about the censorship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There is like a joke in English that you learn as a kid that is similar to grass mud horse, which is sofa king.
Yeah, well, same thing. I guess same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, same. I see. You know, as different as we are, we're the same. But I do think it's interesting that one, any country on earth could think that they could build an internet where no one said swears. First of all, I think that's really funny. I think that's just like a really funny waste of everyone's time.
It kind of sounds nice to me.
No, I just think like
I'm imagining people trying to be as mean as they are posting at subtweeting each other.
Meaner.
But
meaner.
Yeah, I think it'd be cute to watch people have to articulate themselves by not just being like, you fucking bitch, but having to be like, you ignorant.
You can't even you're not on the level of grass mud horse. You got to like really think about it.
But surprisingly, right? I think interestingly, some of the most polite discussion boards in China back in that period, not that I was on them, were like porn discussion boards because they were already blocked by the Chinese internet
In China.
Yeah, like pornography was always sort of censored, right? There's no question about that. But the mods are extremely good at circumventing censorship by just like changing server, changing their domain names.
So this actually ties to something we touched on in a previous episode of the show where we were talking about the Silk Road, the Tor-based dark web drug site. And the guests, we were talking about how polite and nice they all were on there because like in the darker parts of the web, you kind of live or die by your reputation in a way.
Yeah.
So that actually clocks with me that like, I mean, early 4chan had this as well, where like, obviously it was always kind of a renegade, insane place, but there were parts of 4chan that were like allowing forms of speech that were unacceptable elsewhere because like you're stuck with each other in a way. That's fascinating that was happening in China too.
On these porn discussion boards, you have very strict rules, right? Because you might lose your account. And that was considered like a very difficult thing to get during this period, and there was no censorship, and all the counter moderation was done by the mods.
Do you feel like in the 2000s, like, does it feel fair to say that like these early anti-censorship protests were the moment when like a unique Chinese internet culture started to form?
I mean, unique to China, or that it was different from it was unique to the rest of the world.
To put this another way, like, do you feel like there's a way to talk about Chinese internet culture without talking about censorship? Like, because it's like from the outside perspective, it feels like they're very much molded by one another in a way, sort of in the same way that like American internet culture, I think, is you cannot really talk about it without talking about free speech because it is, you know, I mean, we have people posting swastikas on every day now. Like we're full Nazi bar now, but like to me, it feels like at this moment in time, as America was defining its internet culture as one that could allow Occupy Wall Street and it could allow Anonymous and it could allow WikiLeaks, China's was becoming different in the opposite direction, even if it was producing similar outcomes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was unique in the sense that, in that sense that China is different because there's censorship and people were finding all sorts of ways around censorship. But also, as you mentioned, right, the U.S. is doing exactly the same exercise, though towards a very different direction. And the European Union was also grappling with its own thing.
Yes.
So I think it just led to very different outcomes. I think there's it'd be a mistake to take the U.S. case as the default and say the Chinese deviated from that norm.
No, and I am not saying that. Yeah.
Whereas it's just like some sort of governments became more involved. Like in the 2000s in the U.S., you couldn't convince a lot of these people who work in government that the internet mattered, right? Or like what people said on the internet mattered.
In case people forgot, censorship in America was so bad that the Dixie Chicks like essentially ceased to exist in public after they were aggressively anti-George W. Bush for reasons they were historically right about, and their lives are still a mess. We are talking like peak American post 9/11 censorship. To even say that America like is the default, like there's no argument there in my mind.
Online piracy was very much popular in China when
Hell yeah, brother.
And yeah, well,
I had a terabyte of stolen music by 2009. I should be in jail. Let's keep moving along our timeline to the next big site we can compare to an American tech platform. Are you familiar with ACFun?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So ACFun is an anime fan site. Gets really popular around 2009. It goes offline. A user and former employee makes a new website, and it's called mikufans.cn. Are you familiar with this version?
Yeah, it's a Bilibili, the original Bilibili, right?
So that's where we're headed. Yeah. So what I think is really funny about this is, do you know Hatsune Miku? Are you familiar with Hatsune Miku?
No, I'm not super plugged in.
Okay, so Hatsune Miku is a Japanese Vocaloid, which is it's like an anime girl hologram, and she's open source. And mikufans.cn seems to have been like a place for people to talk about Hatsune Miku.
Hatsune Miku. Yeah. The vocal. Yeah. Okay. All right.
It all comes back to the love of anime girls. And then that becomes Bilibili, and Bilibili I would say is probably the closest China has to like a YouTube. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, it was completely run by weebs.
Incredible.
For a long time.
I was actually hunting around on Bilibili the other day for a story, and the shit posting level that's happening on Bilibili is unlike anything we have in America. It's so good. It's like people are just like taking shit posting to an art form over there. I'm very jealous of it, actually.
Compare it. How's it? Different?
Well, okay. Have you seen those CGI home remodeling videos, Tianyu?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm very familiar with that world.
Yeah, so
I spent hours on them sometimes.
Yeah, they're amazing. And so I was trying to figure out where they came from, and I found like a group of artists, like CGI artists on Bilibili, that are taking requests to make the most ridiculous, insane home remodeling video. And they're all giving them really funny titles like "Incredible Perfect House for 1,000 Children," and in the comments they're writing things like "I want to kill myself for doing this," or like "I'm so sad I wasted my one life making this." So like they're just shit posting on a much more intense level, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, there's also the Damu, right? So the things that the floating comments in the midst of the videos that we don't have here in the US.
Nico Nico Doga is another one that does this, and essentially, like if you comment on a video on Bilibili or Nico Nico, you're gonna see the comment come across the screen. I watched a video of a Japanese guy unknowingly light his apartment on fire by flicking a cigarette behind him, and he like doesn't see the comments that are streaming across him being like, "Your house is burning down, your house is burning down," and it's really funny. He didn't get hurt, but it was pretty funny. But so back to our timeline, back to our story here. This is, I think, once again, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I feel like we spotted like the first real big moment of government internet shutdown in China, which is when the government clamps down after the riots in Urumqi.
Yeah, Urumqi.
Urumqi.
Yeah.
So after the riots in Urumqi, which, by the way, we're not going to be focusing heavily on the sort of like surveillance and crackdown on Uyghurs in China in this episode. It's a massive topic, and trying to fit that in with everything else just seemed totally impossible. But the earliest days of the Chinese crackdown on Uyghur Muslims after the riots in Urumqi do play a really important part in the story that we're telling today about the evolution of Chinese internet. So a lot of microblogging sites shut down, they don't reopen for a long time, and a lot of those users move over to a site that's much more happy to play ball with the Chinese government, a website that I think is arguably probably one of, if not the most important websites in Chinese history, a little place called Weibo, which is kind of like, I mean, if this does it sound right, it's kind of like if MySpace evolved into something as important and powerful as Twitter.
Yeah, that would be a good way to put it.
Do you use Weibo? Have you ever used Weibo?
I got banned from them like there 3 times, I think.
Please tell me everything. How did you get banned from Weibo?
Oh, well, one time I was using my actual account to test what will get censored.
Sure, that's one way to do it.
And it turned out to be a terrible idea. Okay. And I think I just like, there were several times I was just like being stupid. I was like, let me see if I can get banned by doing this. And I got banned several times. But yes, you're totally right. That was the first major like crackdown on sort of like internet platforms. This was also a period of time when I would mention that before microblogs, before like Weibo, there were plenty of bloggers in China. And they would do this thing called the annual conference of Chinese bloggers. And that also got shut down in 2010, right? So there was that crackdown was both online and it was also offline, right? That people were told like, do not organize this conference, do not gather for this event. And also like in Xinjiang, because of the riots, I think internet was actually completely shut off to the region for several months, if not a year.
I would give nothing more to go back in time and attend the National Conference of Chinese Bloggers.
And like I also mentioned that these previous iterations of microblog platforms, right, like Fanfo, for example, like they were very important sort of landmarks in Chinese internet history, precisely because they provided this model for Weibo, which is like a small project in this larger conglomerate that was Sina, the larger company. I
think the most important piece here before we kind of move forward is that Sina. I don't know. It's just,
okay. I've never pronounced it in English. You know.
Yeah. Sina figured out a similar strategy to Twitter in the early 2010s, which is if you want to grow a social network really fast, you bring on every celebrity. And I think up until maybe the late 2010s, Weibo's like big thing was like it could offer the Twitter experience, the Instagram experience. You had these verified profiles. I've used it a little bit. It's cool. The emojis are really good. The Doge emoji is like really flirty. I made an account there and I got a lot of flirty Doge emojis, which I thought was nice. And it's an interesting thing. I think Americans would really benefit from seeing how it works, because it is kind of this alternate timeline of the way our social platforms may have worked. You know, what if our internet was more focused on e-commerce from the jump? What if our internet was more focused on video faster? You know, what if we were more mobile earlier? All of the things that we sort of do now on our internet, a lot of it was very, very, very baked into Chinese internet from the jump. And so it does kind of represent this alternate way of thinking about how information technology functions, which I think is just really neat. But throughout the early 2010s, it's a lot of restructuring. Chinese internet is sort of like, it's expanding as international companies are leaving. Google leaves in 2010. As it's expanding, the government has, like, I think, more of a firmer thumbprint on it. Bilibili launches a payment system even before YouTube does. And this is when I think you get the first real American misunderstanding of Chinese technology, which is the social credit score hysteria. Oh, yeah. Can you explain what we got wrong here, just to sort of help us understand, like, why we're still freaking out about the Chinese social credit score?
Yeah, sure. So in 2014, there was a state document that was about implementing a social credit system. There are two parts to it, right? Like, one is this idea of a personal credit score. Then the other part is sort of a credit score for companies and business people, right? So part of the problem that we're trying to solve at this time was that a lot of people were, say, taking out a loan from one province, and then they don't pay the loan back. And then they go start the same business in a different province, and there's no consistent record of that this person has been I mean, it's very similar to FICO. It's very or not at the high granularity level, right? But if you read the documents of the planning documents during that period of time, they were referencing FICO. They were referencing these like credit systems that we have in the US and in Europe, and they're saying, look, we should do something similar because people are defaulting on their debt. And they go to other places to scam other people. So that was it was primarily targeting business transactions. But I think in the 2016, 2017, there was this small part of this larger plan that was about establishing some sort of personal credit system. And they had 30, 40 pilot cities in China. And one of them was the city in Shandong province called Rongcheng. It's a very small city by Chinese standard, but a large city, I'm sure, by any other standard.
Sure.
They basically came up with their own list of things that you would do to get scores and others to get your scores deducted. It never really became a real thing. It was only in pilot. And people sort of decided that was kind of a bad idea because
I could see that being bad.
Yeah, right. Like, and it was not really specifically political. It wasn't about you posting things on the internet. It was like, oh, you can gain points if you. I don't remember exact details of this, but you can gain points if you won an award from the city.
This is the era where China starts to really expand into what is now, I think, the predominant like internet platform there, which is social shopping. So like the easiest way for an American to wrap your head around is like, what if everything was Groupon? And then what if Groupon was also your FICO score? And then what if like Groupon and your FICO score like gave you more Groupons for how you like lived in your city?
Yeah.
That seems...
Yeah, so there was also a corporate version of the same thing, right? That people were trying to grapple with, okay, now we have all this data, right? Or we're collecting all these data from people. What do we do with it? And for a government is like, oh, we want to make sure that people don't go from province to borrow money from banks. And I mean, I don't know if they're doing that too well, but for companies like Alibaba, for companies like Meituan, they're trying to figure out how do you monetize on this data. and to make sure that like people buy from Alibaba or like Ant Financial, the financing arm, or like people, you lend money from the same company, you would sell your stuff from the same company, you would bank with the same company, etc. Right? So I think they were trying to figure out what all that data could be monetized for.
I think one thing that you've touched on several times that I want to try to make explicit, because I think it is something that is missing from a lot of the conversations about Chinese internet. And it's something that, like, when I've spoken to sort of either experts or people working in Chinese internet companies, the transition from rural to urban and the sort of still massive split between urban and rural is not in the rear view. Like, it is something that was like being addressed as China was coming online. These tech platforms were not being created for the same kind of like middle class post World War II society that America had in the 2000s.
In late 2000s, early 2010s, China, you have what we called the Taobao villages, right?
A Taobao village, probably the American equivalent, just for comparison's sake, it would probably be like those towns that exist just for like Amazon fulfillment centers. We have them. We just like don't think about them that way, and ours are also run by a massive dystopian capitalistic corporation like that. That would be the difference, but they're not that different. There are places in the Midwest where like there are just people whose only lives are sending stuff out on Amazon. So it's once again pretty similar.
Originally, it was more like eBay, so it was more. It was vendor to customer, and they charge like a processing fee. But now it's become much more complicated, right? It's like Alipay and Taobao are the same company.
Okay, so you're basically saying like there were these villages in China that were making the majority of their income from just like selling goods on essentially Chinese eBay.
Yeah, most of their customers are not other Chinese like villagers, right? They're these people who live in cities. So you do have this rural urban divide was actually critical to the e-commerce infrastructure that was up and coming during this period.
It's not exactly the same, but I read this incredible story years ago about this kid in, I want to say, India. It was in the global south, and I'm pretty sure it was India. He was the Google guy in his village, so he had a phone that he had Google on, and he was charging everyone a small fee to Google questions for them, and like that was like his job. And I think like Americans just can't even wrap their head around the idea that like you can be in a rural part of the global south and have very, very fast internet on a very, very cheap phone, and your concerns about the internet are just never going to be the same as someone living in like fucking Cincinnati. Like they're just never going to line up.
Exactly.
And when we are confused in America, we love to escalate the situation into, a international security incident. And that's what we're going to be talking about after the break. But first, a word from our sponsors. That guy who sells neon signs on TikTok from that Chinese factory. Those look pretty good. And he's very good at accents. But I don't enjoy like his weird right-wing turn, but I assume it's because he's micro-targeting Americans. In the mid-2000s is, I think, where you start to get the creation of the Chinese internet that I think most Americans are now, warning their children about right before they go to bed at night, saying that President Xi is going to come into their house and brainwash them through TikTok. So Douyin launches in 2016. It gets 100 million users in a year, which is unreal. It then ByteDance launches, the owner of Douyin launches TikTok in 2007 outside of China. It merges with Musical.ly, the like cute boy lip sync app, in 2018, and that creates the TikTok we know and love. And that is also around the same time that Chinese censors become, I think, a lot more aggressive about the kind of cute wordplay protests. This is when they start banning Winnie the Pooh.
Well, the Winnie the Pooh meme was never really banned in the sense that, like, if you make a reference to Winnie the Pooh, like, to talk about Xi Jinping, then it is going to be a problem. But the character itself was never banned. Like, you see it everywhere.
The actual character isn't. Okay. But this is when we also start to see WeChat banning non-state approved political videos. And the West starts to fear and really notice how involved the Chinese government is in controlling what's online when, in 2019, the Hong Kong protests break out. I was actually there, and I was talking to protesters, and they were all trying very hard not to use Chinese tech products, including ones made by ByteDance. But also, like, the specter of growing, increasingly powerful Chinese tech haunted them. Whether it was surveillance, whether it was like stuff installed on their phones, what internet they connected to. It was a really fascinating moment where like these young people were trying to create their own internet culture from scratch with their own tools as this like massive behemoth was clearly coming. Like, can you speak to like how you view that flashpoint? Because to me, looking back, it feels like the sort of switch, I think, in terms of how China.
Yeah. So I think well, for one, the Hong Kong sort of tech ecosystem has always been slightly different.
Sure.
Where the language was different, people weren't, Google wasn't banned there. Most of the American platforms weren't banned there. So it was easier for people to use, say, a non-Chinese stack of technologies, right? Like you can use your iPhones, you can use your Telegrams. That was okay. But at the same time, right, you do have people who cross borders from Hong Kong to China, and their phones will get checked to see if they install Telegram on it. You would have stories of people being recognized for who they were using facial recognition technologies. I think it's important to note that 2016, 2019, that particular period was when the Chinese government had much stronger facial recognition capabilities.
Right.
And like the reason that censorship became more effective from the Chinese government's perspective was because of artificial intelligence, that we're using large language models, albeit earlier iterations of that, to detect what kind of content should be censored. So I think these two things go hand in hand. And the Hong Kong case was interesting because I think it really reshaped the American view of
I think so too.
Technologies, and I think more so the American perception than the Chinese reality, because China had been like that for quite a few years.
Right.
You know, when I first moved to the Bay Area in 2021, I would go around and ask people, 2018, 2019, San Francisco was like, you would invest in Chinese companies and you would want to invest in Chinese startups. You're curious about what's going on in China. In 2021, it's like, no, we're not touching it. So I started asking people what really changed, right? And they will all say it's the Hong Kong protests, because they thought China was becoming authoritarian using their technologies, which I still don't understand why that was a valid argument, because China has always been authoritarian. Why was it that you felt okay that the Chinese government was using technology for quote-unquote authoritarianism in China, but when that's on Hong Kong, that becomes a moral issue for you? Like, I never understood that. So
my thought is that I think a lot of Westerners saw Hong Kong as this separate place. And it was like, oh, if China can do that there, they can do it in Taiwan. And then if they can do it in Taiwan, then they can do it in London, and they can do it in New York. And it was, I think, a moment of, to be very frank, as someone who's been very critical of American tech companies, I think Americans saw for the first time what many countries have experienced via Facebook and Twitter and our own technology, and freaked the fuck out.
Yeah,
that's what I think happened.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true in the story. Yeah, I do think there was a lot of misassessments of what the Chinese central government could do at that point, in 2019. But that's a totally different story, right? Totally different conversation.
But there was one other thing I think that we sort of have to hit when we're telling the story of Chinese internet, and that's COVID. So we hit this at the top, but I think not only was Hong Kong the moment where Americans started to actually kind of like get a sense of like the Chinese government as maybe like an imperialistic or a sort of like aggressive government entity, and got a sense of like what their technology kind of looked and felt like. But I also feel like COVID was a moment where the Chinese censorship was a lot more like we were covering it more here, and we had just sort of come, and we haven't really talked about like this surveillance with like the Uyghurs and sort of like how but you had sort of touched on this like this half decade of like increasingly powerful Chinese surveillance. And I feel like with Hong Kong, the Uyghurs, and then COVID, it just hits this point where we're at now, where we've been at for 5 years, where the West is afraid of China, but they're not sure what they're afraid of. And it's like we're just lashing out, like not understanding what any of these platforms do, how they connect to the government, how people use them. It just seems very confused now.
In the first Trump administration, you see this attack of Chinese surveillance technologies, people were making these moralistic statements of Chinese tech. I think a lot of it is completely valid. The human rights violations, I think those are completely valid. But we're doing exactly the same thing here in the United States.
We sure are.
Like Palantir, we have companies like Clearview AI at the time selling more or less the same technologies, sometimes better technologies to DHS, to local police bureaus. The scale of these technologies were used differently, or the way that they're used were different compared to the Chinese counterparts, but they were there, right? And
we are right now using privately made facial recognition software to pick up random Hispanic men and send them to a gulag in El Salvador for prison sentences that come in 9,000 year increments. Like we are completely in the deep end, and I lost any sort of perceived moral superiority here.
This is the point when I think, in retrospect, right, a lot of people were mad about China's technological development and its sort of techno-authoritarian state because they couldn't do it themselves, or they wanted to be like China and they weren't.
Jealousy, yes.
Yeah, I think it's jealousy, and it's in both cases the goals are terrible, and I think these are misguided things to do. But they were jealous of it, right? And the way that, I hate to get on this current affair, the abundance, type of ideology that's coming out on the U.S.
You're talking about the Ezra Klein book, the abundance. I've not wasted the time to figure out what the abundance agenda is, and you can't make me learn what it is.
I'm not going to tell you what it is, right? But I will say that there is a obsession with state-oriented, state-driven technological progress that involves like export controls, that involves regulations. I mean, that ideology has been around for a long time, right? Even the Biden administration was trying to push for this, like, we're going to ban Chinese EVs so we develop our domestic industry. We're going to justify every single piece of our legislation, regulation based on this narrative technological competition with China. They want to become like China. Like, I just think that's what they want, right? Is to become to do the things that China was able to accomplish in the last 20 years. With all the good things and the bad things.
I mean, to hit this point again, because I do think it is like the most important and least covered aspect of this. China was able to make tech products that are in many ways functionally better. Like, it beat Google to Google and still worked better in an open market when Google was still accessible there. And it did it while transitioning sociologically, basically where America was in, like, let's say the 20s or 30s, as like America, like the 1920s or 30s, like as America is going from rural to industrialized society, China did that move while also beating Google to making Google. There are, and you're right, there are humanitarian concerns, there are surveillance concerns, and those are real. They are real. But I think the thing that has brought us to this moment right now, where everyone is afraid of Chinese tech, is a jealousy that, like, China was able to pull that off, and we can't even really make a good electric car. We can't even really do that. In China, you can buy a vape that's also an Android phone. Like, come on.
Why do you think China has been so much better at making everything than us? Is it free speech?
Is it the lack of free speech? Is it? Yeah, but that is a real question. Like, what is your gut tell you there? Like, why has China been so successful?
I mean, I think it's an economy of scale, right?
Sure.
It has this incredibly sophisticated manufacturing base that was built up in the last, like, 30, 40 years. That, by the way, like, we often see this narrative that, like, China took away American manufacturing. The American manufacturing gave it away to Asia, like in the 1970s and 80s, when the corporate bosses, factory owners, hit the unions, and they're saying, we're sending our manufacturing to Asia. That was a choice. They could have given it to unionized workers, and they chose not to. But China does have a manufacturing base that's much stronger. No matter however niche your manufacturer, the thing that you're manufacturing, it always has a market, right? Whether that be domestic or international.
A vape that's also an Android phone. Yeah, exactly.
That's also an Android phone. And also just like the way that hardware manufacturing, hardware designers here in the US. Like to test a prototype, you have to send your prototype to China, and then they ship it back to you, and then you're like, oh, this is not okay. And you have to do this iterative process, and that takes a very, very long time when your factory is overseas. I think there's a lot of criticism that like China was copying stuff for like 20, 30 years. I think that in many ways that was a learning process, right? You learn how to do things and you do it really well.
America can no longer talk about copying anything with any sort of high ground. The argument that
it's over. Like I don't think there's any moral high ground.
No, we don't have it. Also, like the China is copying stuff argument. You saw it most recently with the release of DeepSeek this year, the Chinese ChatGPT competitor. And like, did they copy ChatGPT? Maybe. What did ChatGPT do? Copy the entire internet? Like, it's a stupid argument. But
it's total piracy. Right?
Yeah, but also as this episode has kind of gone through, like it actually doesn't really bear that out. Like, China had e-commerce faster, it had fintech faster, it had social media in different and more interesting ways. Like, it is a totally different evolutionary branch. And if you like really dig into how people have been using the internet in China for the last 25 years, like it doesn't hold scrutiny. Like I find this stuff super fascinating, and I try to read as much as I can about it. And like, I don't see it. I don't see the Chinese internet as a cheap knockoff of American internet. If anything, it's like weirder and stranger with like kind of cooler features sometimes and kind of dumb in different ways too. Like, I mean, trying to use WeChat as a foreigner in China, like to order a car, like kill me. Like, honestly, kill me. Like, that is so goddamn hard. Like, there is dumb things about Chinese internet too. It's just different, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you mentioned the car story, right? Like, I was in South Korea for the first time a few weeks ago, and it was actually I got the experience of what a non-Chinese person will get in China.
Yep.
Where I landed, I realized none of my apps work because Google Maps, you can't use it in South Korea.
I should explain this because Korea has a very siloed internet as well because of concerns of the North Korean government spying on them. So you can't use Google products. You have to use Korean-made products, and certain geolocation stuff just doesn't work there. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's not explicitly banned. You just can't use it, right?
Yeah, it just doesn't work. Yeah, it's blocked.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. Like, it will tell you to go to the wrong like bus station.
Right.
Yeah, I had to read down all these apps. I have to like do verification, and a lot of things don't work in English. I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to be a non-Chinese person in China. And like a lot of it, just like, oh, I think this sucks. But I think the logic is deeply embedded in the way that these platforms are designed.
Well, I think ultimately, the really important takeaway for people from this episode is one. Americans should understand more stuff about how other people's internet works and functions. And I think the second one is America has no moral high ground at all and maybe never will again. And God bless the Chinese century upon us, because Jesus, like, I mean, yeah, every argument we could have ever made about the Chinese surveillance state, we have to like reckon with at home first. Tian, thank you for coming on. This was great.
Thank you for having me.
Great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
If people want to follow you on the internet, where can they do that?
I'm still on Twitter once in a while. My Twitter handle is TIANYUF, TIANYUF, and I mostly just write things on my website. Like, I just write things here and there now. So my website is tianyufang.net.
That's the best. Writing things on websites is the true way to defeat global censorship and surveillance.
I just want to go back to blogging, the blogging sort of 2000s. That's
when we bring back the International Committee of Chinese Bloggers, we can expand it and we can do like an international consortium of bloggers. I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah, that would be great.
So normally I would let Grant out of his little producer cage to ask our guests a couple questions. And then we normally put those on our Patreon version, but this week we thought we'd just include them here. But if you do like the sort of feeling of like, wow, the episode's over. Oh, wait, it's not over. That's fantastic. You should definitely subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/panicworld. Okay, producer Grant, I'm letting you out of your cage. Also, I have 5 minutes and then I got to leave. So you got to make this fast.
Damn you, Ryan. Compare the surveillance at this stage of America to Chinese surveillance.
Yeah, for one, I think the Chinese American surveillance states are just different. For one, I think the surveillance in the U.S. is mostly coming from corporations. And those are not vacuous, right? They have real implications on your lives, being constantly surveilled by corporations with no limits. Whereas in China, you do have a lot of regulations in recent years about what kind of data that companies can collect, and like what are the terms that they can loan you money. But you are under this surveillance of a very powerful state, right? So I think it's a pick your poison type of game, and I don't think either is good.
Do you have an Elon Musk running your apps? Because if not,
but Elon Musk is running a factory, the gigafactory in Shanghai right now. So who knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
See, that's the real thing. Is that both models are so bad that they both allow Elon Musk to exist. So there's nothing, like they both got to
That's a real
start
test,
over.
Is whether Elon Musk has a business in your country.
Both systems have allowed the virus of Elon Musk to exist within them, so we have to smash both, unfortunately. Yeah,
I totally agree.
pretty bad.
Yeah.
Who is more internet brain rot?
China. Yeah, definitely. It's every time I go there, I don't know. I feel like all the internet brain rots in the U.S. It's all in the same cultural context, more or less. There hasn't been a brain rot that is completely incomprehensible to me. I feel like on the Chinese internet, I keep seeing brain rots that are completely. I have no idea how to make sense of this. There's no way I can make sense of this. I would just completely give up right now. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's the dream, man. Honestly,
maybe the cure is to get sicker.
It works.
Maybe that's the only answer.
To see a meme so bizarre and specific and niche that it's impossible to comprehend. That's the dream, man. That's all. All right, I gotta run. Thank you again. This was fantastic. Panic World is a Garbage Day production. Subscribe to the newsletter at garbageday.email. Panic World is written and produced by Grant Irving. It's hosted by me, Ryan Broderick. Our amazing researcher is Adam Bumas. It's engineered by Rebecca Seidel. Our deranged logo was created by Gabby Cash. Please give us $5 at patreon.com/panicworld. Please give us products to sell by contacting Multitude at multitude.production/ads. For any other way you would like to give us money or work with us or promote us or become financially entangled with us, you can reach out to our fixer, our wonderful bag man, Josh Fjelstad, and you can reach him at panicworldpod@gmail.com. And one piece of advice from me to you: chill out, touch grass while you still can.